this was one of the places in ex-Yugoslavia where the war was the hardest. This was somewhat of the Aleppo from Syria of the Yugoslavian war.
Meet Palle Bo, a full-time traveler and digital nomad from Denmark on an epic journey around the world. At the age of 50, he made a bold decision. He sold everything, his house, his car, his furniture, and set out on a quest to visit every country in the world, documenting everything along the way. This is the Radio Vagabond.
Again, I go by bus to my next Balkan destination, from Kotor in Montenegro, north to Mostar in the southern part of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Directly to the places so that you don't spend a long time.
The owner of the hostel I booked, Denny, came to pick me up, and here we are in the car. My name is Palle Bo, and this is episode 176 of the Radio Vagabond.
Usually on the left side is the way to the hostel and the old town, but with a car we have to drive a big loop, which means you're gonna become now free tour.
There's a river that runs through Mostar from the north to the south. I'm arriving on the bus station east of the river, and even though my hostel also is on the eastern side, we take a bit of a detour into the western side because cars are not allowed in the old town.
And you have to tell me now one thing. What's the reason that you decided to come to Mostar?
Because I met this guy who stayed with you in Kosovo.
Edward.
Yeah. You remember him?
Not really. You're gonna show me a picture?
Yeah. Big, tall guy with a very English accent.
Oh, like this along here?
Yeah, he's a musician.
Yeah. I know, I don't remember Edward.
It was an English guy called Edward, one of the other guests at the hostel in Kosovo, that recommended Mostar and rooms Denny to me. That's one of the benefits of staying at a hostel where you interact with the other travelers.
Good. What do you know about the city? At the beginning, just to tell you, feel free, guys, to ask me whatever you need. Treat me like your best friend, like your brother, or as an asshole as you want. So as I said, I'm usually a backpacker, and this is the biggest reason why I'm running a hostel. I want to show people the reality about my region, and especially the comfort to enjoy and to feel like at home. Okay?
Yeah.
So please, now tell me, what do you know about...
Only the bridge and about...
I don't even know about the bridge.
No, I didn't even know about the bridge. And since that's apparently the most iconic thing about Mostar, I didn't know much, or anything, other than what Edward told me, that it's a quaint little city with a lot of history. We'll get back to the bridge and why it's so important later in this episode. Let's get back in the car, and even though it's just me and Danny, he starts talking as if he was a guide with a microphone on a tour bus.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mostar. In this city we had the war. The city which during Yugoslavia time used to be the second touristic attraction after Dubrovnik. The city with a lot of history, but everything was destroyed during the war. The war which
Danny is a bit of a character, and thank God. He's very open and has an impressive knowledge about his country, and especially Mostar. Bosnia Herzegovina is home to 3.8 million people, and Mostar, here in the southern part of the country, has a population of 113,000. Mostar is Bosnia and Herzegovina's most divided city. Nowhere is it more evident than in Mostar, where Bosnian Croats live on the western side of the Neretva River and the Bosniaks live on the eastern side. Even to this day, more than 25 years after the war, this is still the case. They rarely go and interact with the people on the other side. Danny tells me that he does have friends on both sides, but he's more the exception to the rule. Both sides of the river has their own national theater, post office, and other public services.
Then please, ladies and gentlemen, here we are.
That completes the tour.
Okay.
This episode is brought to you in part by this website called Hotels25.com.
If you're a regular listener, you have heard me mention this before. And I can't say this enough. This is a cool website. It helps you find the cheapest hotel rooms around the world. Hotels25.com. You should try it out. It actually works.
The Radio Vagabond. Gotta keep moving.
Now I'm in Bosnia, in the small city of Mostar, and this was one of the places in ex-Yugoslavia where the war was the hardest. This was somewhat of the Aleppo from Syria of the Yugoslavian war. And as I walked through the streets, still to this day, a lot of the houses, you can see bullet holes, and a lot of them, 10, 15 buildings so far on this small stretch of 500 meters are still totally in ruins. Trees growing out of them, and but still really totally in ruins. And it's devastating to see. The owner of the hostel I'm staying at recommended me to see a BBC documentary that's on YouTube called Unfinished Business in Mostar. And I just watched that before going here, and now I'm walking in the streets where in the documentary you can see people dying in the streets and trying to fix them up in a hospital that was totally unfit for getting severe casualties like that. And what really gets to me is that this is in Europe, and I was living in Europe at the time. I was an adult. I was somewhat of an adult. I was in my 20s, and I was focusing on completely different things. Of course, I knew and was following the Yugoslavian war and everything that was going on right here, not that far away. But it really gets to me when I'm here and can see what it looks like. I'm on my way to a new museum that opened just a month ago called the Genocide Museum, and it should be just around the corner.
The documentary Unfinished Business, presented by Jeremy Bowens from BBC, is filmed in 1993 in and around Mostar at the height of the Bosnia-Croat conflict during the Bosnian War.
Croatian propaganda echoing over the front line in Mostar, the most vicious theatre of war in Bosnia Herzegovina.
It's surreal to see the streets I'm walking in right now as a war zone in this documentary.
Since May, Bosnian Croats, aided and abetted by the Croatian government, have been laying siege to about 60,000 people in East Mostar. Almost all of them are Muslims, and they're fighting back hard.
Already 1 minute in, we see some guys come running with a wheelbarrow to get an old man that just had been shot.
There are no safe places in East Mostar. You can be killed or maimed at any time on any street corner. Until you see it happening, it's hard to realize how quickly lives can be destroyed.
They wanted to rush him to the hospital in this wheelbarrow.
Franja Pavlovic, who was born a Croat, made the mistake of going out to repair some shell damage on what had started out as a quiet morning.
The old man just stepped out of his house to get some water when it happened.
For her sake, he went through the motions.
At the hospital, a doctor gives him CPR in an attempt to revive him. But there's nothing he could do. These first few minutes of the documentary sets the tone for the rest of it. It's heartbreaking, but I really suggest that you see it. We should all see it and learn from it. You'll find it on theradiovagabond.com. The siege of Mostar was fought during the Bosnian War, first in 1992 and then again later in 93 to 94. As a result of the first siege, around 90,000 residents of Mostar fled, and many religious buildings, cultural institutions and bridges were damaged or destroyed. Between June 93 and April 94, the besieged Bosnia concentrated East Mostar resulted in death of many civilians, a cut-off of humanitarian aid, damage or destruction of 10 mosques.
The Croats on the hill know that if the bridge falls, they will have savaged morale on the other side. It would be a strategic victory as well, because it's the route to the front line.
And then the blowing up of the historic Stari Most Bridge on November 9th, 1993. Croatian General Slobodan Praljak was deemed the main responsible for the destruction of the bridge and sentenced to 20 years behind bars. He was the one who declared that those old stones, meaning the bridge, had no value. Stari Most, which literally means old bridge, is also known as Mostar Bridge, and it connects the two parts of the city. It was a 16th century Ottoman bridge and stood for 427 years until that fateful day in 93. After the war, a project was set in motion to reconstruct it, and the rebuilt bridge, that looks like the old bridge, opened in July 2004. It's now an iconic tourist attraction. It stands 20 meters over the river, and you can often see people jumping off it into the water.
One ticket?
Yes.
The Museum of War and Genocide Victims is a small but interesting and very moving museum about the events leading up to the breakup of the former Yugoslavia. The way the history of the war is explained is very moving and extremely touching. What the people in Bosnia, and especially Mostar, went through is unimaginable. The personal stories of those who lived in these times are, as always, the most moving. It's an important part of the history of Bosnia Herzegovina and Mostar, and anyone visiting must go to the museum to learn and out of respect for the victims and the locals who suffered through it. There are some very graphic, shocking photos on display. Also 3 TVs, each showing different stories about the war and the concentration camps. There's quite a bit to read, as each display and picture has a story behind it. On the lower floor is where the more graphic photos are displayed, so if you're easily upset or if you're bringing kids, you might want to skip that part. All in all, it's horrific to see what happened, but I feel it's an important visit to get a clearer view of what happened and why it should never happen again. There's also a part of the museum talking about war crimes, with so many pictures of people doing something against the Hague and Geneva Conventions. And that's what bothers me the most. How could this happen with the Second World War in recent memory? Didn't we learn anything? As it says on the wall in the museum, the terror of forgetting is greater than the terror of having too much to remember. That's why I feel it's important to visit a place like this, even though it's not an upbeat, uplifting experience.
This is the Radio Vagabond Podcast.
Okay, time to lift the mood. Here are 6 fun facts about where we are.
And now, facts about where we are.
Bosnia Herzegovina is nicknamed the heart-shaped country due to the country's slight heart shape. When you look at a map to check that fact, you might think that Bosnia Herzegovina is landlocked, But if you look very closely, you will notice that they have the smallest little panhandle, which touches the Adriatic Sea for only about 25 kilometers or 15 miles. One of Europe's last jungles can be found here, situated on the border of Montenegro. Perušica is one of the 2 remaining jungle forests in Europe. Some of the trees here are 300 years old, and the undisturbed forest vintage back to 20,000 years. Bosnia Herzegovina has 3 official languages: Bosnian, Croatian, and Serbian. They are pretty similar, and they all understand each other, kind of like Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish, or American, Irish, and Australian, I think. The name Bosnia comes from an Indo-European word, Bosana, which means water. Herzegovina stems from the Serbo-Croatian term borrowed from German, Herzegovina, a land ruled by a Herzog, the German word for duke. They like coffee here. Bosnia-Herzegovina has the 10th highest coffee consumption per capita in the world.
And that was Facts About Where We Are.
I'm on a Herzegovina tour today with Danny, the owner of the hostel I'm staying at, and we started out with a local breakfast at a restaurant, and we had some kind of bread that was a little bit like donuts, but then again not so sweet, and locally produced cheese and marmalade and some special kind of syrup that they have here. And then we had Bosnian coffee, and it was very nice. And right now we're walking along a wild river, and we got a tall mountain in the background and some small shops. It's like a bazaar. I don't know exactly what Danny's gonna show us, but we'll find out now. I'm about to cross the river on the small bridge. We're 6 people on this tour, 2 Americans, 2 English, and 1 Irish, and then me. You repeat that? And then, of course, Danny, the Bosnian guy.
How do we got the name Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially here in the region of Herzegovina? So everything came up from the last Bosnian king, who was really rich, and he decided to invest a lot of money into the vineyards.
On the Herzegovina day trip, Danny takes us about 30 kilometers, 19 miles, south of Mostar. We go on a hike in some astonishing landscapes to the waterfall in Kravica, and then to Bušicels, the historic village and an open-air museum with a fortress in the mountains. In the Middle Ages, it was the administrative center and the center of the governance in the country, and its westernmost point, which gave it a major strategic importance. It's supposed that the fortified walled city was built in 1383, and it's definitely worth a visit.
Danny just explained the difference between Bosnia and Herzegovina. The official name is, of course, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Most people just call it Bosnia, but he said if you want to do it right, you should say Bosnia and Herzegovina. We're in the Herzegovina region now. It's the southern part of the country. It's lower, more Mediterranean climate than the northern part, the Bosnian part, which is in the mountains. So the weather is different there, and that's also one of the reasons why Sarajevo was able to host the Winter Olympics a few years ago. Now we're walking up in the hills. That's why I'm a bit out of breath. Down below I can see the river flowing, and there's a lot of water coming out of the mountain that is pure drinking water. And it's so beautiful here.
Back in Mostar, we walk together across the old bridge to the western side for dinner and drinks at the iconic Black Dog pub. And we all sing along to Hit the Road Jack.
That's right, in the road, Jack. And don't you come back no more.
Have you ever wondered what the places in this podcast actually look like? I have. So, I started following the Radio Vagabond on Instagram, simply by searching Radio Vagabond.
What is that?
The Radio Vagabond. Gotta keep moving.
And I'm about to hit the road myself. In a few minutes, I will tell you where I'm going and the answer to this little pop quiz question. There's a statue here in Mostar. Who do you think it is? A. Barack Obama, B. Bruce Lee, C. Boris Yeltsin. I'll tell you in a few seconds. First, I want to mention that I would love to hear from you, and now there's a new and very simple way for you to send me a voice message. It's a cool little web-based app called Telby, and all you need to do is click on the banner on the radiovagabond.com where it says "Talk to me," and then just talk. Tell me where you are and what you're doing while you're listening to this. It's super simple, and one of the cool things is that you can listen to it and redo it if you're not happy with it before you click send. Please try that. I get a small soundbite that I can play here on the show, and it's always wonderful to hear from you guys. You can, of course, also fill out the form under contact on the website. This episode is supported in part by Hotels25.com, where you can always find the best prices on hotels, guest houses, and hostels, like Rooms Denny, where I stayed here in Mostar. Okay, back to the pop quiz. For some reason, here in Mostar, there's a statue of Kung Fu expert Bruce Lee. Yup, Bruce Lee. The statue was the first public monument of Bruce Lee anywhere in the world, and it was unveiled in November 2005. Why, you may ask? Well, the idea came from a youth group called Mostar Urban Movement, and they saw this statue as a symbol of loyalty, skill, friendship, and justice. In a city that had been torn in a war by ethnic divisions, they see the dynamic movie star as a part of their idea of universal justice, that the good guys can win. They feel that Bruce Lee represented one thing that could bridge the divides between Mostar residents. One thing we all have in common is Bruce Lee, they said. Shortly thereafter, the sculpture was vandalized and removed for repairs and brought back at the end of May 2013. Both Bosnians and Croats had complained that the statue was a provocation because they thought it was pointing towards their area in a fighting stance, so its creators rotated the statue a little bit to face a neutral direction. Okay, enough about Bruce Lee. Now it's time for me to hit the road, and my next stop will be Croatia. My name is Palabo, and I gotta keep moving. See ya.
Produced by radioguru.co.uk.